So we are back and ready to welcome Ran Sneer from MyHeritage for his webinar, MyHeritage DNA One-on-One. Ran Sneer is the product manager responsible for MyHeritage DNA products from A to Z. He leads a talented team of developers, QA engineers, and designers to create and optimize DNA's user's entire journey, from ordering a DNA kit, tracking the kit's progress, receive results, leaving a continually growing suite of features to make the most of the DNA results in genealogical research. Most recently, he led the development of the Chromosome browser for shared DNA segments feature from concept to product and launch. Ran, will that be also correct for the autosomal? Oh no, the autosomal, you worked actually with Jay, right?
On the AutoClusters, you mean?
On the
Yes.
AutoClusters, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that's another of your winning task on MyHeritage. And for everybody to know, Ran is my good friend. And if he is here with us on a Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning from Israel, he has to be one of my best friends. So without further ado, I'm going to make him the presenter, and I'm going to let him tell you all about the MyHeritage DNA test and matches. Ran, it's all yours.
okay, thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here this time. Hope you can see my screen and nothing's hiding anything. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to give a quick lecture about MyHeritage DNA 101, from the very basics all the way to the more advanced tools that we have, kind of an overview. So the lecture will be split. We'll start with some basic introduction, glossary terms, all these words that sometimes pop up on different when you're looking at your DNA results and maybe not sure what they mean. So we're going to cover some of the basics, and then later on we're going to move on to the product. So this webinar is, of course, as you all probably know, part of the 24-hour genealogy webinar marathon. I'm super excited to take part of this, making history, breaking the world record for the longest ever genealogy webinar. All right, so without further ado, let's start with DNA at a glance. So all of us human beings, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. We call the first 22 pairs autosomal, and then the last one is the sex chromosome, which defines our sex, an XY for males and two X's for a female. And this is kind of like a general overview of how the genome looks for a human being. So these are the chromosomes. And here is an example. I put here two different genomes on the top and on the bottom of two different individuals. And while you look at them, they might look a little similar with some minor differences. And the riddle here is who was tested, whose DNA, whose genome is it on the top and whose genome is it on the bottom. And I'll tell you the secret, the one at the top is a human chromosome, and the one at the bottom is one of a chimpanzee. So you can see that the two genomes look pretty much the same. We share a lot of with the chimpanzees. Actually, we share 98% of our DNA looks similar to the one of a chimpanzee. But we're not testing chimpanzees, not yet, maybe in the future. In the meantime, we're mostly focusing on testing human beings. And when we're testing human beings, the similarity is actually 99.9%. So if we'll take those 23 pairs of chromosomes that we have, and we match any two individuals and look at the entire genome of both, 99.9% will be exactly the same. That's the reason why we can walk, we can talk, we have similar characteristics, and that 0.1% remaining, which is different, is the one that actually defines us from one another, that differentiates us from one another. Let's take a deep dive. Let's look a little bit deeper. And let's take chromosome 1, for example. So there are two pairs. And the reason that there are two pairs for each one of the chromosomes is because we inherit each one from each parent. So let's say, for example, that the one on the left here I've inherited from my dad, and the one on the right I've inherited from my mom. Let's zoom in on the chromosome, which is kind of a long strain, as you can see here. And if we zoom in, we actually see that the two of them combined together are actually built up of letters. We have 4 letters for each one of those points, of those genetic markers on the chromosome, T, G, A, and C. And these are the results. These are the DNA results, the markers, the ones that define us. So here we can see an A and a T. So in this specific position, I've inherited the letter A from parent A and the letter T from parent B, one or the other. There are over 3 billion base pairs on the entire genome. And again, as I mentioned, 99.9% of them are similar. What we are looking at is at that remaining spot, that 0.1%, which is different, and we're working with that to provide you your DNA results. Otherwise, everyone would have just gotten the same results. So we spoke about what a chromosome is, and now let's explain what a segment is. So you can see here, if I'm taking T, G, and A, you can see kind of a sequence. So each one of these as a standalone, they're called SNPs, like genetic markers on the chromosome. And if we'll take a sequence of them, that is what we're considering a segment. Okay, so TGA is a small segment on chromosome 1 on one of the alleles. We call each pair an allele. So on each, so TGA is a segment built out of 3 SNPs on chromosome 1. Okay? Let's try and see that with an example and explain what really happens when DNA is inherited from parents to children. So we have here our my favorite couple, Frank and Molly. They've been helping me for the past 3 years to explain these kind of concepts. And Frank and Molly, let's decide that now we're going to look at chromosome 1 of each one of them. And I think one of the best ways to illustrate this is using colors. So you can see that Frank is represented with the purple colors. One is darker, one is lighter, and Molly is with the orange hues. And you can see that Frank has one allele, or one of the pairs is from his father, and the other one is from his mother, and same for Molly. Now, Frank and Molly had a child, Ben. And now let's look at Ben's chromosome number 1, his first chromosome. So you can see that from Frank, he inherited some parts of the first pair, of the first allele, and then the rest of the chromosome is from Frank's second allele, right? A little bit from grandma, a little bit from grandpa. This is what it actually means. Let's zoom in for a second. So you can see that Frank contributed the more darker purple at the beginning, and then there was a switch. We switched and we started taking from the other grandparent, right? This part of DNA was inherited from the second grandparent. That point right here, what happened here is what we call a recombination event. It happens a lot of times when the children are conceived, and that's when we switch between one allele to the other. We make this hop. We take a little segment from the first one, then another segment from the other one, back to the first, to the second, to the first, to the second, and that's how the DNA looks like. So in Ben's case, we had one recombination event on chromosome 1 in this example. If we look at what happened on the maternal side with Molly, we can see that it happened twice. So in this part, for example, Ben inherited some from, let's say, grandpa, then grandma, and then back from grandpa. And that's how we're conceived, and that's how the 22 autosomal chromosomes work or look like, or how DNA is passed down. So what we can do with all this information? So we break the information down into 2 main epics or themes on MyHeritage. The first one is that we can identify your ethnicity estimate. An ethnicity estimate is what we call the architecture of genome variation between populations. If we were able to say that this is the DNA of someone coming from that region, from that ethnic group, and we know how to identify it, we can look and try and see if we can determine those patterns in a person's DNA. Let's see how it looks. Let's take Mike, and this is Mike's maternal side. So we can see here his mother, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Let's assume for a second, and again we're going to use color. We're not going to say Italian or French or English. We're going to say all his great-grandparents were purple, okay, for the sake of simplicity. So in the case if all of them were purple, it means that also his grandparents were purple, his mom is purple, and he inherited roughly 50% purpleness, purplish, okay? Let's see what's going on the other side of the family. Here, things get a little bit more complex. So we have two great-grandparents who are orange, one who is red, and one who is blue. Again, the colors represent ethnicities around the world, right? And what happens here is that when we're looking at his grandma on the paternal side, she's all purple because her parents were, orange because her parents were orange. But the grandfather is half blue and half red because he inherited roughly 50% from each one of the great-grandparents. His father is now even more diverse, and when we get to Mike, we now have 25% of the orange from the great-grandparents and 12.5 from each one of the other great-grandparents. And that's Mike's ethnicity estimate. So you can see how he inherited some from his ancestors on the maternal side and how he inherited some from the ones on the paternal side. Another thing we're doing, and what we'll mostly focus on towards the continuing of the webinar, are DNA matches. DNA matches are relatives, people with whom you share enough DNA that are already on MyHeritage system. They have either taken a DNA test with us or have uploaded from another vendor if they've tested with them. And we look at the database, we look at all the people who have brought their DNA in, and we're trying to look for similarities. So people who have long enough segments, right, which we spoke about, which might indicate that they have all, that there's a shared ancestor. There's a common ancestor to the two of them. Let's look at the example of Frank and Molly. So again, Frank and Molly have different colors, right, altogether, purple and orange. And now Ben had a sister. Her name is Lisa. And we can see that Lisa, even though the parents are the same, they've inherited different parts of that chromosome number 1. And that will repeat for the 22, for the rest of the chromosome. So here, if we'll try and look and see how much DNA does Ben and Lisa have in common, how many segments look the same, if we overlap the two on one another, we can see that this is the amount of shared DNA that they have. Even though they both have the same parents, obviously they don't share 100% DNA, otherwise they would have been identical twins. That's the only case in nature where we have 100% of shared DNA, is where we inherit the exact same segments from both parents. So in siblings, on average, we'll be sharing 50%, and this is what you can see here with Ben and Lisa. Now, Ben and Lisa got married with their spouses, and Eric and Julia were born, so you can see different colors added here. So Eric is Ben's son, and Julia is Lisa's daughter. And we can see that there are some green and blue introduced from the spouses of the two, right? So they are not related to the family, and obviously they will not share any DNA here. But if we look again at the first allele of both, which still has some DNA from Frank and Molly, and we see how much now they have in common, we can see that it degraded. Now we have even less, probably about 50%, because Eric and Julia are first cousins to one another. They are further away. They share less DNA than what siblings would have shared. And that's exactly how DNA matches work. We look at those segments. We're trying to look for patterns that repeat between person A and person B. And if that pattern is long enough, we can say that there's a shared segment and an enough shared amount of DNA between the two. So 50% will be something that goes for parents children or spouses, 25% will make another hop of generation, 12.5, 625, and so on and so forth, and we're getting further away in the relationship between the two people. So here, for example, we have my wife and my daughter, and let's say that my daughter now we get a DNA match with a Jane Doe with a certain amount of shared DNA. What that might mean is that we have a segment, one or more, that's long enough that both my and Jane have inherited from a common ancestor. In this example right here, that's my grandfather or my great-grandfather marked in blue on the top left side. His DNA was passed down to both my and Jane. All right. So now that we covered the basics, we can move on to the product overview and discuss a little bit about the different things we have on MyHeritage that can help you with your genealogical research and what you can do with them. So we'll focus more on the DNA matches side. And after your results are ready, you will get your list of DNA matches, which looks something like this. All the examples I'm going to give today are from my personal DNA matches and some close family members and more distant. So here is a DNA match that I received recently with a Mr. Homer Simpson. And let's see what we can tell you about him. So we can tell you that what's his age and where he's from. So we can see that Homer is in his 40s, from the USA, and there's an option to contact Homer. Next, and I'm jumping for a second to the paragraph on the right, you can see the DNA match quality. So here you can see all the things we just discussed, right? So how much amount of shared DNA? So 1.4, which is 102 centimorgans, which is the distance, the measurement for distance in genetics, how long the segment is. We can see how many shared segments there are. So there are 10. And what is the length of the largest segment? And when we take all these into consideration, we come up with several options of how Homer and I can be related. So we can see here in the estimated relationships that Homer can be in between my first cousin twice removed to a third cousin. So if you're not sure what twice removed means or how a fourth cousin is related and who is the common ancestor in such case, we've added that question mark, which you can click on each one of the DNA matches, and a dynamic chart will open up showing you where you are and where Homer can be, what are the relationships that Homer is applicable for based on the amount of shared DNA. So here we can see the first cousin twice removed till third cousin, and Homer can be each one of these. Obviously the age plays a part here, so you can use that to eliminate some of the options. So if I'm, for example, in my 30s and Homer is in his 40s, it's less likely that he's 2 generations up, so maybe I can drop the option of first cousin twice removed. At the bottom of the card, we're showing you information based on your family tree and Homer's family tree. What we want to achieve with the DNA matches is ideally understand how Homer and I are related. Who is the common ancestor that had passed down the same DNA, the same segments to both me and Homer? So the way to do it is to use genealogy that we all like and love and do all the time. So here, for example, we're showing you ancestral surnames common to you and Homer, whether you have smart matches between you and Homer, between the tree which you are on and Homer is on. For those who don't know, smart matches are indications for individuals in different trees who our algorithms on MyHeritage have identified that they could be the same person because of the names and the ages and the places in which events took place. So that's very useful. If Homer has 237 people who probably exist on my tree, that's a very good sign to maybe to start and understand how we're related. And we're also showing ancestral places. At the top right corner, you have the option to add notes. These are private to you, and you can write here whatever you want. As you make further improvement or progress with your research, you can put here any note that you'd like, and it will be available all the time for you to review. All right. What else you can do with your list? You can search, and you can filter your results, as you can see at the top right corner, so that you can look at matches with whom you only have shared surnames, shared places, and things like that. Now let's deep dive and look and click on the review DNA match, which I have here. because I found a DNA match which is more interesting to me and I want to look further and see what more information exists. So when I click on the Review DNA Match page, I get, on the Review DNA Match button, I get to this page, which includes a lot of components with a lot of information that I can use to better understand how I and my DNA match are related. The first component, which will be shown on top in case it exists, is the Theory of Family Relativity. Theory of Family Relativity is something that we put in place that is trying to take all of the information we have on MyHeritage to tell you how you are related to your DNA matches. And we're trying to take all the pieces of information that we have. We have on MyHeritage to date almost 12 billion historical records, nearly 50 million family trees, and nearly 4 billion profiles. And we're taking all that pieces of information together and using smart matches and record matches and other technology, we're trying to connect the dots. We're trying to say how individual A is related to individual B, who is related to individual C, and kind of create a chain. So the great thing about this is that we're taking all the information that we have, and even if you, in your tree and in your DNA matches tree, we couldn't find enough evidence or important pieces of information to surface, maybe that information exists in other people's trees or in historical records or other sources of data. And let's see how it looks. So now in this example, I'm logged in as Roman on the bottom left side, and Roman is matched with an Amelia, shown on the right side. And the Theory of Family Relativity has determined that the two of them could be second cousin once removed. And you can see here a path of how the two of them are related through Alexander and Margaret, their common ancestors. But neither Amelia nor Roman had Alexander and Margaret in their trees. So how are we able to come up with that? So you can click on the View Full Theory to see exactly how that turned out. And you'll get to this page showing you a detailed overview of how we were able to come up with this theory. Let's go one by one. So we're starting with Roman, and Roman has a family tree on MyHeritage managed by him. And in that family tree, he added his mom, he added his grandfather Kip, and then maybe he stopped. That's all the information he knew, or that's all the information he added. Doesn't really matter. Because what we were able to find is another Kip Solomon on a different website, unrelated to the DNA match, managed by Laura from Australia. So Laura also had Kip Solomon in her tree, and the dates look pretty much the same. There is a smart match with a grade of 100%. So it's a really good smart match. You're not sure for yourself, you want to look at more information? No problem. You can click on that icon, and a side-by-side comparison will open up, showing you the information we have on the first tree and on the second tree. And you can look and judge for yourself whether it makes sense or not. Sometimes there will be more information here that might be valuable to you. So now we're on Laura's tree, and we'll continue to climb up the tree up until we get to Alexander and Margaret. And from that point on, we're starting going down, because Alexander and Margaret are the common ancestors that we believe, the theory suggests, between Roman and Amelia, his DNA match. So we got to John, and then we made another jump to a tree managed by Jacqueline from Great Britain. And we keep on with Jacqueline, and eventually we make a jump back to the trees, to Amelia's tree, and to Amelia herself. And that's how the theory suggests that they are second cousin once removed. So you can look at your theories and see which ones makes more sense, which one makes less. I will say that there's a reason why we decided to call it the Theory of Family Relativity. As you probably know, or some of you might be in shock, some people fill in wrong information in their trees. They give wrong details because they don't know, or because they're relying on some information that is not based or not documented properly, and there could be mistakes. As much as we're trying to implement the smartest technology there is, it's sometimes difficult to figure out or to understand that someone made a mistake or that the information is inaccurate. So you need to judge for yourself and look at the theories thoroughly and make sure that once you have an hypothesis, a theory of how two people are related, you should always go back to the documentation and papers and try to confirm it as much as you can. So that was the theory of family relativity. Next, we're showing you smart matches. So in this example right here, this is me and Tomer, my cousin, and I'm showing individuals who exist in my tree and on his tree. And I can judge for myself and see whether it makes sense. I can then try to understand how I'm related to Professor Joseph and how Tomer is related to Professor Joseph on his tree. It's also implied right there. And we can look at that and then maybe understand the relation between the two of us. We're showing you ancestral surnames. So these are surnames that appear both in your tree and on your DNA matches tree. So we can see here the Bloom and the Carmens, all are from my maternal side, and I can assume that Tomer is related to me on my maternal side. We are using a couple of smart technologies here. So even if people are spelling their names a little bit different, we'd still be able to identify it. For example, Bloom with a U or Bloom with double O, and indicate it as a shared surname. And also if people have written the same names in different languages, we support several of these. So if I would have written here Bloom in Hebrew and he had Bloom in English, we would still have been able to identify that. If there are no shared surnames, we would still show this component and list you the names on the other person's tree and in yours, so that you can look for yourself and see whether something rings a bell. Maybe you haven't listed all your surnames yet in your family tree. So have a look and decide for yourself. Next in line, we have the ancestral places. So we looked at surnames, but there are also places where birth and death events took place. And that can also be a good hint. So for example, right here, me and Tomer, I can see that we have shared ancestral places in Bulgaria, Israel, Romania, Russia, and Turkey. And I can click on each one of these countries to see pins on the map of where events took place. Purple means an event that the two of us had in the same place, as we can see right here. And in case only one side has an event, like the gray pin will indicate that, which is an event in Russia, on my case, which happened in Chelyabinsk. However, Tomer doesn't have events specifically in Chelyabinsk, Russia. He has events in Moscow. If there are no ancestral places, shared ancestral places, we would still list them down, as you can see here, very similar to what we're doing with the ancestral surnames. So you can see here all my ancestral places on the left, and Stuart, in this case, my DNA match places on the right, and they are mentioned, so you can have a look. Shared DNA matches is a cool feature that allows us to see, and a very useful one, maybe the most useful one when doing genetic genealogy, is the one that is showing us people. Well, keep in mind, I'm now looking at one DNA match, in this case Tomer, at the top right, and I'm trying to understand how we're related. And I'm looking here at a list of people who I have on my DNA matches list, and also Tomer has on his DNA matches list. So all the three of us are DNA matches, okay, to one another. So here what I can do, assuming I didn't know who Tomer was, I can look at the DNA matches and see if something rings a bell. So for example, I can see here my mom and my aunt, her sister, and my daughter and brother, who are not really helpful here because we're always trying to go up and not down. But I don't see my father here, and I don't see anyone from my paternal side who I tested. So that's a really good sign that Tomer is related to me on the maternal side. On the right side, you see an indication for some of the DNA matches, indicating that a triangulated segment, one or more, exists. And we'll get in a second to what that means. Below the shared DNA matches, you have the pedigree chart, which is a quick overview of the DNA matches family tree. We're showing you shared ethnicities that you have in your results and Eilon has in his results. So in this example right here, let's say it's, for me personally, that's not the most helpful thing because both my parents are Ashkenazi Jewish. But let's say, for example, that my mom was Italian and my father was Iberian, and I get a DNA match who doesn't have any tree, and he's 100% Italian. Maybe that's a hint for me that it's coming from my maternal side. If in my example I chose Italy for mom. Okay, and last but not least on the page, we will show you the chromosome browser. This goes back to the beginning of the webinar, to the beginning of my explanations on the basics of DNA. What you see here, and I hope this kind of looks the same or rings a bell, the colored segments that you see, the colored spots, are places on the genome where you have shared DNA with the person that you're looking at. So that means that maybe right there at the beginning of chromosome 1, and then somewhere towards the mid-half, there's some shared DNA. A common ancestor have passed down the same DNA to both me and Eilon, or Tomer. And that's, as we discussed, what is actually happening behind the scenes. So this is the data and how it's reflected on the chromosome browser. So the chromosome browser just lets you see on what points of the genome you have shared DNA with that person. And that comes in handy when we're trying to work with the one-to-many chromosome browser. Our next topic. Triangulated segments, which I also showed in the shared DNA matches, are shared DNA segments that you and all of the selected DNA matches share with one another, and therefore likely all inherited from a common ancestor. That could be a little bit challenging, but I believe that with some examples we'll be able to understand that. Here's a tree of 4 people who have taken a DNA test, all at the bottom, Alice, Bob, Carol, and David. And let's try and see or estimate which one of the 4 here might have a triangulated segment, meaning I'll take 3 people or more, and they will all have the same shared DNA from common ancestors. So maybe you can see that there's a first group here, Carol, Alice, and Bob, and they're all descendants of William and Zandra. So, likely, William and Zandra passed down some DNA that both Carol, Alice, and Bob have. And there's another group, consists of Alice, Bob, and David, who are all descendants of Eve and Zelda. And all of them should, or potentially will have, triangulated segments, pieces of DNA that are similar to all 3 of them, and have all inherited from Eve and Zelda. You can check all that using the chromosome browser, which is located under Tools. And when you get to the chromosome browser, you'll see all your DNA matches. And you can start adding them, up to 7, to the bank at the top. So let's use, for example, and we'll take my father and his mother, my grandma, and we'll try to compare and look at the information that we have. So each line here represents the DNA I share with the person. So in red here is my shared DNA with my dad, and in the orangey color is the DNA I share with my grandma. And you can see the information on the amount of shared DNA at the top. And on the chromosome browser, you see these bubbles circling the areas which are common to all 3 of us. And right here I have 25 triangulated segments, which are those marked with this bubble right here. At the bottom of the page, if you want to look at the raw data and not in a graphical way, we also have a table showing you the exact same information that you can see on the top. Where do those triangulated segments start, stop, what's their length, etc. Let's take another example. I have a DNA match named Jackie, and I'm trying to understand how Jackie is related to me. So I'm taking myself, my grandma, and Jackie, and trying to see how the DNA looks like on the chromosome browser. So if I'll have a triangulated segment for the 3 of them, that means that Jackie is probably related to me on my maternal, through my grandma, Raya, right there. So when we're looking at the data, even though there are some places which overlap on chromosome 1 and 6, it says that I don't have any triangulated segments. And the question is why? How is it that I have a shared segment with my grandma there at chromosome 1, and then a shared segment with Jackie at the exact same spot, but there are no triangulated segments? And the reason is that we have 2 alleles, as we showed in the beginning. So in this case right here, I'm probably sharing the first allele with my grandma, and my second allele with Jackie. Jackie might be related to me either from my paternal side, from my maternal side, I'm sorry, this is my paternal grandmother. And that's the reason why we don't see the triangulated segments. The best example to show this is when taking myself, my mom, and my dad and putting it all in the chromosome browser. So in a first look, it looks as if we're all sharing, the genome is full, everything is so colorful and beautiful, but we don't have any triangulated segments. And the reason is that I took one pair as a whole from my father, and then the second one from my mother. And since they are not matching one another, they are not related, my mom and my dad, there are no triangulated segments. So that's why it's worth to look at the bubbles around circling the triangulated segments. These are indication that the other people are also matching one another and at the same spot. So this is another way to look at what happens here on chromosome 1, for example, between me, my mom, and my dad. Let's take one last example. So I got a new DNA match gene, and let's see how the chromosome browser can come in handy. I got a new DNA match named Gene, and I want to understand how Gene is related to me. Unfortunately, as you may see at the bottom, he doesn't have a family tree, so I can't use surnames or places or any other thing. All I have to do is work with the genetic information that they have. So I go to the chromosome browser, and I start by putting mom and Gene and see whether we're related. We have triangulated segments, I mean. And the chromosome browser indicates to me that there are no triangulated segments. So for now, I'm going to rule out the option that I'm related to Gene through mom. Taking dad and repeating the same step. Okay, this is cool. I have 7 triangulated segments and I can look at where they are. And I can continue on. So now I'm going up the tree, and since I was lucky enough to test my grandma and my father's mother, I'm trying to see whether I have a triangulated segment with grandma and Gene. I compare, and unfortunately there are no triangulated segments. So I'm, for now, going to assume that Gene is not related to me through grandma, and he's related to me through grandpa. And now what I need to do is try and take cousins of my grandpa, since he passed away, and try to see if they triangulate with him. And they try to go up the tree, up the pedigree tree, up until I can find DNA of ancestors, of people related to my ancestors, and see whether they triangulate with my DNA match who I'm currently looking at. As long as I keep seeing the triangulated segments and their size is decent and long enough, this is something I can rely on. Another last example is a Melvin, is a person I was looking for. Is a person I'm trying to understand the connection with for a very long time. And I'm taking Edie, who's my second cousin once removed, who I also was able to meet and learn about through DNA testing. And I'm checking, I used Edie right here to understand whether Melvin, Edie, and I are related. And I saw that there's a triangulated segment, so I can assume that a Melvin is related to me through the same common ancestors I share with Edie. Running a little bit out of time, I wanted to discuss one last thing before we pass this on to questions, and these are the AutoClusters we have on MyHeritage. So they can also be accessed from the Tools section. AutoClusters is a really cool concept we released last February, I believe, and we work on it together with E.J. Blom from Genetic Affairs. And the concept of AutoClusters is that it looks at your DNA matches in a higher level. It tries not to look, all the things we discussed so far, maybe aside of the chromosome browser, we're looking at every DNA match as a single unit. AutoClusters is taking this to the next level and trying to group together DNA matches so that they can all as a group tell us something new that we didn't know before. So you can generate your AutoCluster report, and once it's ready, it will be sent to you so that you can also work on that offline. And it will look something like this when it opens up. Not really appealing, right? But after a second or so, the AutoClusters will rearrange themselves in a cute animative way, and they will be broken down into groups of matches. But what are AutoClusters, right? What is it, aside of very beautiful squares on a sheet? So AutoClusters, what we're doing is that we're looking at your DNA matches, and for each one of your DNA matches, we're looking at the shared DNA matches, right? People who you and that person share with other people. And we're running that algorithm many times in the background. We're trying to build groups of people, connecting people together into bulks, into groups, into clusters, that they all probably share DNA with one another, but still distinct enough. Here's an example. Let's say that on my matches I have A, B, C, and D, and I have E, F, and G. And when I looked at the shared DNA matches of A, when I went to my review DNA match page with A, I saw in the shared DNA matches B, C, and D. But I didn't see E, F, and G, and vice versa. So I kind of I'm looking and trying to build groups of people who are all related to one another, but are not related to others. And when I'm able to do that, for example, when I was able to break it down to these two groups right here, maybe I can say that these are coming from my dad's side, and these are coming from my mom's side. And that's exactly what AutoCluster does. So let's deep dive. The X and the Y axis are similar. These are the DNA matches in the report. So it's kind of like a mirror that goes diagonally. And you can see right here, for example, a Wilson Brook and a Greg Hicks, and every color dot indicates that there's a shared DNA between myself and these two people. They also share DNA with one another. When you hover, you can see the names of the other people in cluster. Now, sometimes, like in this example, still in the same cluster, Hilda and Macy don't have a DNA match between them. They are my DNA matches because otherwise they wouldn't have been here in the report, but they're not sharing DNA with one another. And it's fine. The algorithm decided to put them here because they still match enough people in the cluster to be counted in. Maybe they're just a little bit farther away. Maybe the match is just very tiny or too small. But because they share DNA, they have enough DNA matches in that cluster, we still decided to leave them in. Sometimes you'll see those gray areas marked here with the black square. And that means that these two people, Mandy and Rihanna, there's a shared DNA between the three of us, but they are in different clusters, in the orange one and in the green one. When you see a lot of these happen, like in this example, it probably means that if there were maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 more people, those two clusters have merged together into a bigger cluster, okay? Coming from the same ancestor. So we discussed this, right? So what this actually does is that it lets us identify DNA matches or all descendants from common ancestors into groups. Let's look at A, B, C, and D. This is me, my dad, and my two grandparents. So A, B, C, and D are all matches that are shared with my dad. But maybe if I left my dad outside of the equation and took only the DNA and looked only at the grandparents level, maybe I could have said that A, B are related from one grandfather, one grandparent, and C and D from another grandparent. And this is what it actually does. It breaks those DNA matches into groups of people who maybe are related from different ancestors because they're not matching with the other people, and we can put them into separate groups and indicate that they're coming from different ancestors. And that's it for now. I'm almost on time. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Daniel?
Yes, that was a wonderful presentation, and I know your presentation, so I can already tell you, everybody, I saw a few new screens over there, and that was great. We have some questions here, but we also have a raffle that we need to do. So let me first get this back to me. And I will read you the questions, Ran, and hopefully we will be able to answer all of them. I would like to tell Cynthia Mills, congratulations, as you just won MyHeritage DNA kit, of course. That had to be our prize for the hour. And this and all the other webinars are being recorded, so you are more than welcome to go to Family Tree Webinars and subscribe to have access to the handouts and to all the classes over there. This one is going to be free for a week, so you can still go back and enjoy it, but after that, it will be only for subscribers. So, Ran, I have here a good couple of questions that I couldn't answer. I have been answering questions while you were giving the lecture. And I heard a lot, especially at the conferences when we meet our users. Does the current DNA testing allow for determination of ancient DNA such as the Neanderthal ancestry?
Okay, so that's a question of whether in our reports we provide Neanderthal variants. On MyHeritage to date, we are not doing that. There's some other ways, other places where you can get that sort of information. On MyHeritage, we're currently focusing more on DNA matches. We're trying to put more emphasis on the DNA matches and ethnicity estimate sides and things that will more help with the genealogical research. As the Neanderthal is great, it's fun, I like it personally, but it's less helpful in the context of doing genealogical research, in my personal opinion.
Don't we all have Neanderthal DNA? I mean, those are our ancestors, right?
Yeah, very far, way back, and it's a question of how many variants do you detect and whether we can point them to different populations. But yeah.
Great. Now, it is another question here from Katrin. It is possible to have triangulated segments but not be related, like a false positive?
So that's a very good question. And it comes back to the discussion of the sizes of the segments also. And it really depends. So much has been written about it, but not enough actually. It also depends on your, for example, if you're coming from an endogamous population, whether endogamy is common, exists in your history. Very common to Ashkenazi Jewish, such as myself, for example. And there are also kind of this area where there are pileups and known areas for pileups. That's also mentioned in our educational center. We have a document and an article about that. So there are some places on the chromosome where we see a lot of people, too many people that all have shared DNA at that specific spot. There are 3, 4, 5 different places like that on the 22 autosomal chromosomes, and that won't indicate yes, eventually there's a common ancestor, but not something in the last 10, 12 generations, right? Something that goes way back. That's probably indicating more of like that we have the same ethnicity and not really the same ancestors. Shared common ancestors, right?
Okay. Listen, you have here a bunch of congratulations, amazing presentation. You have clarified the mystery of DNA now for Becky and probably for a lot of other people, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Michelle is asking if you can do all that stuff without paid membership on MyHeritage. I can answer that. You can do part of them. Some of the features are restricted only for paid members, or there is a one-time fee for $29 per kit that you can pay and still enjoy all the features. And I'm right, Ran? Did I make my homework? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. A+.
Okay, so probably the last question in the time we have. What is the formula to convert shared DNA percentage to centimorgans? I know you like to talk about centimorgans. I personally find it easier to talk about percentages. Any formula for that?
Yes, so what we pretty much do, and it really changes between companies and it depends on whether you're doing matches on X or not, but let's focus now on the autosomal chromosomes. So it's if we had full DNA, both alleles, it's something around 7,200 centimorgans, something like that, to 700, 400 maybe. And if you pretty much divide that, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but look at the amount of CM that you have, divide by 7,400. It's also really, because remember there are two alleles, right? So you could, in cases of endogamy, for example, you could have shared DNA on the first allele and on the second allele, which will make the amount of shared DNA even higher. So it really depends on how you're calculating that. But if you'll take the full genome size, which is at the 704,000, and you divide the amount by that, that pretty much sums up as the percentage.
Okay, excellent. Ran, thank you very much for being here today in this 24-hour genealogy webinar marathon. I'm sure I'm going to keep answering a few of the questions that I have here, and I'm going to make sure that you get all the comments and you're a manager as well. So no worries. Thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody, for your questions and your time, and keep on enjoying.